Hello there, children. Good morning. How are you? For today's Sunday school lesson, we're going to examine our heart. Yes. Sometimes we wonder whether our heart is in the right place. We do rise and fall. So what better way to examine our heart than to look at one of the Bible characters? In this case, we're going to look at King David. Yes, because God called King David man after my own heart. But something happened along the way. Let's begin. Everyone knows the stories of King David, from the time he was anointed by the prophet Samuel to killing the giant Goliath and many other adventures of his till he became king. So things were going very well for David. God called him man after my own heart. However, this was going to come to a crashing end one day, because on one particular day, David became distracted and he did something so terrible. God called him man after my own heart, but because of this, God was really hurt, and life was never the same for David after this. Our story is found in 2 Samuel chapter 11 and 12. Here, the book of 2 Samuel tells us that in those days, every year, in springtime, the kings would go out to battle. Let's read verse 1 and 2. It happened in the spring of the year, at the time when kings go out to battle. David sent Joab and his servants with him, and all Israel, and they destroyed the people of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. This was very unusual. So David usually follows his men to war, but this time he didn't. He decided to stay at home, perhaps take it easy. Today, I'll take an off day from being the warrior king that God called me to be and sleep at home. It was at this particular moment that the biggest problem in David's life started without him even knowing. A chain of events that sucked David into evil deeds in a very short time. Each year in spring, the kings went to war. Now it is only the Ammonites we are to be afraid of. They must be destroyed. You see to that, Joab. I must stay in Jerusalem. One evening, soon afterwards, the scents of spring make me feel drunk. Verse 2 of chapter 11 says, Then it happened one evening that David arose from his bed and walked on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful to behold. He thought to himself, What a beautiful woman. David found out who she was and had her brought to the palace. Secretly, Bathsheba, your husband's away at war, and your king's thirsty for love. And Bathsheba did not go home until the next morning. The weeks went by. Bathsheba sent her servant to the palace. My mistress sent me to tell you she is pregnant. What? Are you sure? David was completely shocked. He was in big trouble. David was very scared. He immediately sent a message to the commander of the army, Joab. He was going to use Joab to get himself out of trouble. He told Joab to send him Uriah the Hittite, Bathsheba's husband. David had a crafty plan. He wanted to get Uriah back to Jerusalem. As soon as he arrived in Jerusalem, Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, gave David a report of the campaign against the Ammonites. David said, Thank you, Uriah. You may stay in Jerusalem for a few days. And after that, he got up and told Uriah, go and see your wife. You haven't been married very long. Now, do you see what's happening? Just look at him. He is being very nice to Uriah. Why? Because he wants Uriah to spend the night with Bathsheba, just like he spent the night with her, so that if Bathsheba says she's pregnant, it must be Uriah's child. This was why he asked Joab to bring Uriah back to the city, so that Uriah will spend the night with Bathsheba. Now you all see or not? God was watching him and he's doing all this. He's really going to regret this. And God was starting to get really hurt because he called him man after my own heart. But he was not acting like that now. Now God wasn't going to keep quiet about this. He was going to spoil his plan. Yes, because Uriah was not going to go home. He was going to join his soldiers and he was going to sleep outside, just outside David's house. As you can see, there are two friends of Uriah waiting outside. Two witnesses who can say that Uriah did not go home. And Uriah didn't go home. David thought that his plan, his secret plan, was a success. But he was so surprised when he got up the next morning and he saw Uriah outside. He asked Uriah, didn't you spend the night at home? And Uriah answered, No sir, I didn't have the heart to go home while the army is still camping out in the open. Right now, let's read the actual words from chapter 11 to see what Uriah actually said to David. Verse 9. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and did not go down to his house. So when they told David, saying, Uriah did not go down to his house, David said to Uriah, Did you not come from a journey? Why did you not go down to your house? And Uriah said to David, The ark and Israel and Judah are dwelling in tents, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are encamped in the open fields. Shall I then go to my house to eat and drink and lie with my wife? As you live, and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing. Wow! Look at Uriah's words. They sound like David's words. Look at Uriah's heart. Looks like Uriah is the man after God's heart now. And this must be very disturbing for David. He should have gotten the message. God was trying to tell David something through Uriah, but David wouldn't listen. Instead, he went a step further. He tried to get Uriah drunk again. Let's read verse 12. Then David said to Uriah, Wait here today also, and tomorrow I will let you depart. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. Now, when David called him, he ate and drank before him, and he made him drunk. And at evening he went out to lie on his bed with the servants of his lord, but he did not go down to his house. So David tried to get Uriah to go back to his own house 2 times, and both times he failed because God intervened and was trying to tell David something, but David wasn't listening because he was too busy trying to save himself. So when David found out that Uriah wasn't gonna go home, he decided to do something even worse. Verse 14. In the morning it happened that David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. And he wrote in the letter saying, Set Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle and retreat from him, that he may be struck down and die. Wow, David, he wanted to kill Uriah. Not only that, he had Joab now as his accomplice. This is very strange. Now Uriah is saying the same thing that David said just a few chapters earlier in chapter 7 of 2 Samuel, verse 2. The king said to Nathan the prophet, See now, I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells inside tent curtains. Then Nathan said to the king, Go, do all that is in your heart, for the Lord is with you. And so, at the city called Rabbah that day, the besieged army made a sortie, and many of Israel's soldiers were killed, and Uriah was among them. And when the time of mourning was over, David married Bathsheba. But what David had done was wrong in God's sight. There's something very peculiar about God which we can learn if we just go back to 2 Samuel chapter 7. In chapter 7, David did say that he was feeling very down and not feeling very good about him living in a house of cedar while the Lord's house was just a tent. So David came before the Lord and told him, "Lord, I want to build you a house." And this really pleased the Lord. And the Lord made many promises to David. And he told him how he had carried him from the time he was a shepherd boy to killing Goliath, and now he was king. So God sent his prophet Nathan to give David a very strong message. "David, you'd better listen carefully. In a town, there were two men, one rich, the other poor. The rich man owned very large flocks. The poor man had only one little lamb. She grew up close to him, ate his bread, drank from his cup, slept next to him. One day, the rich man had a visitor. He didn't want to take one of his own animals for the meal, so he stole the poor man's lamb, and he killed her for his guest." David was shocked. He said, "As the Lord lives, that man deserves to die." "You are that man," the prophet said. "In your family, some will die by the sword. Evil will come to you." David said, "I have sinned against the Lord. I'm not worthy to live." Again, at this point, we can learn another peculiar thing about God. See, God made a lot of promises to David in chapter 7. But now that David had done all this sin, God didn't pull back all those promises. But He didn't pull back the consequences either. They came together. And yet still God knew David's heart has changed a bit. He says to him in chapter 12, verse 10, "Now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me, and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife." The prophet said, "The Lord forgives you. You won't die. But the child Bathsheba's given you will die." And so it was. The great King David now went into a long depression for almost a year until the baby was born, because he knew what evil he had done and what was going to happen to his child. And after this, he spent a lot of time repenting. Here's one of the Psalms that David wrote after this episode of Uriah. Psalms 51. "Be merciful to me, O God, because of your constant love. Because of your great mercy, wipe away my sins. Wash away all my evil and make me clean from my sin." Well, children, that concludes our story. However, it wasn't so for David. After this, things were never the same between God and David. David spent his whole life repenting for the evil that he had done to Uriah. And not only to Uriah, but to Bathsheba and to Joab. Because he went after Bathsheba, he killed Uriah, he plotted Uriah's murder in secret. He did everything in secret. And he also involved Joab into this. And he told Joab to put Uriah in the middle of the fight and tell the men to withdraw. So he involved the men as well. Everyone knew of David's betrayal towards Uriah. And who was Uriah? He was David's friend, isn't he? Now let's talk about it in our day. Have we done something to offend our friends? How do we treat our friends? Do we gossip behind them? Do we tell lies to them? Do we do things underground, in secret, so that they get hurt? Do we use our mouth to gossip? You can see whether this pleases God or not. Is it coming clear now? If we want to walk in a way that pleases God, let's not do all the things that David did that didn't please God. Yes? Doing things in secret, betraying friends, talking bad, talking behind, all this doesn't please God. Okay? And in David's case, it was worse. So, if we look at the book of Psalms, a lot of the book of Psalms are about repentance. It says, "My God, why have you forsaken me? O Lord, where are you?" All this repentance and yearning for God, longing for God, repenting and repenting and repenting. Most of these Psalms were written by David after this Uriah incident. Yes, it changed his life so upside down, that he felt very fallen away from God. So let us meditate on this and let us see how we can please God. I've shared with you the ways in which we can please God, and hopefully we can learn from today's lesson. All right, that's it for today. Goodbye.